Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. Chapter 2. First Lessons in the Art of Instruction. As we drove along, my spirits revived again, and I turned with pleasure to the contemplation of the new life upon which I was entering. But though it was not far past the middle of September, the heavy clouds and strong north-easterly wind combined to render the day extremely cold and dreary, and the journey seemed a very long one. For, as Smith observed, the roads were very heavy, and certainly his horse was very heavy too. It crawled up the hills and crept down them, and only condescended to shake its sides in a trot, where the road was at a dead level or a very gentle slope, which was rarely the case in those rugged regions, so that it was nearly 1 o'clock before we reached the place of our destination. Yet, after all, when we entered the lofty iron gateway, when we drove softly up the smooth, well-rolled carriage road, with the green lawn on each side studded with young trees, and approached the new but stately mansion of Wellwood, rising above its mushroom poplar groves, my heart failed me, and I wished it were a mile or two farther off. For the first time in my life I must stand alone. There was no retreating now. I must enter that house, and introduce myself among its strange inhabitants. But how was it to be done? True, I was near 19, but thanks to my retired life, and the protecting care of my mother and sister, I well knew that many a girl of 15 or under was gifted with a more womanly address and greater ease and self-possession than I was. Yet, if Mrs. Bloomfield were a kind, motherly woman, I might do very well after all, and the children, of course, I should soon be at ease with them. And Mr. Bloomfield, I hoped I should have but little to do with him. Be calm, whatever happens, I said within myself, and truly I kept this resolution so well, and was so fully occupied in steadying my nerves, and stifling the rebellious flutter of my heart, that when I was admitted into the hall, and ushered into the presence of Mrs. Bloomfield, I almost forgot to answer her polite salutation, and it afterwards struck me that the little I did say was spoken in the tone of one half dead or half asleep. The lady, too, was somewhat chilly in her manner, as I discovered when I had time to reflect. She was a tall, spare, stately woman, with thick black hair, cold grey eyes, and extremely sallow complexion. With due politeness, however, she showed me to my bedroom, and left me there to take a little refreshment. I was somewhat dismayed at my appearance on looking in the glass. A cold wind had swelled and reddened my hands, uncurled and entangled my hair, and dyed my face of a pale purple. Add to this, my collar was horridly crumpled, my frock splashed with mud, my feet clad in stout new boots, and as the trunks were not brought up, there was no remedy. So having smoothed my hair as well as I could, and repeatedly twitched my obdurate collar, I proceeded to clomp down the 2 flights of stairs, philosophizing as I went, and with some difficulty found my way into the room where Mrs. Bloomfield awaited me. She led me into the dining-room, where the family luncheon had been laid out. Some beefsteaks and half-cold potatoes were set before me, and while I dined upon these, she sat opposite, watching me, as I thought, and endeavouring to sustain something like a conversation, consisting chiefly of a succession of commonplace remarks, expressed with rigid formality. But this might be more my fault than hers, for I really could not converse. In fact, my attention was almost wholly absorbed in my dinner, not from ravenous appetite, but from distress at the toughness of the beefsteaks and the numbness of my hands, almost palsied by their 5 hours' exposure to the bitter wind. I would gladly have eaten the potatoes and let the meat alone, but having gotten a large piece of the latter on my plate, I could not be so impolite as to leave it, so after many awkward and unsuccessful attempts to cut it with the knife, or tear it with the fork, or pull it asunder between them, sensible that the awful lady was a spectre to the whole transaction, I at last desperately grasped the fork and knife in my fists, like a child of 2 years old, and fell to work with all the little strength I possessed. But this needed some apology. With a feeble attempt at a laugh, I said, "My hands are so benumbed with the cold that I can scarcely handle my knife and fork." "I dare say you would find it cold," replied she with a cool, immutable gravity that did not serve to reassure me. When the ceremony was concluded, she led me into the sitting-room again, where she rang and sent for the children. "You will find them not very far advanced in their attainments," said she, "for I have had so little time to attend to their education myself, and we have thought them too young for a governess till now. but I think they are clever children and very apt to learn, especially the little boy. He is, I think, the flower of the flock, a generous, noble-spirited boy, one to be led but not driven, and remarkable for always speaking the truth. He seems to scorn deception. This was good news. His sister Mary Ann will require watching, continued she, but she is a very good girl upon the whole, though I wish her to be kept out of the nursery as much as possible, as she is now almost 6 years old, and might acquire bad habits from the nurses. I have ordered her crib to be placed in your room, and if you will be so kind as to overlook her washing and dressing, and take charge of her clothes, she need have nothing further to do with the nursery maid. I replied I was quite willing to do so, and at that moment my young pupils entered the apartment, with their 2 younger sisters. Master Tom Bloomfield was a well-grown boy of 7, with a somewhat wiry frame, flaxen hair, blue eyes, small turned-up nose, and fair complexion. Mary Ann was a tall girl, too, somewhat dark like her mother, with a round, full face and high colour in her cheeks. The second sister was Fanny, a very pretty little girl. Mrs. Bloomfield assured me that she was a remarkably gentle child, and required encouragement. She had not learned anything yet, but in a few days she would be 4 years old, and then she might take her first lesson in the alphabet, and be promoted to the schoolroom. The remaining one was Harriet, a little broad, fat, merry, playful thing of scarcely 2, that I coveted more than all the rest, but with her I had nothing to do. I talked to my little pupils as well as I could, and tried to render myself agreeable, but with little success, I fear, for their mother's presence kept me under an unpleasant restraint. They, however, were remarkably free from shyness. They seemed bold, lively children, and I hoped I should soon be on friendly terms with them, the little boy especially, of whom I had heard such a favourable character from his mamma. In Mary Ann there was a certain affected simper, and a craving for notice that I was sorry to observe. But her brother claimed all my attention to himself. He stood bolt upright between me and the fire, with his hands behind his back, talking away like an orator, occasionally interrupting his discourse with a sharp reproof to his sisters when they made too much noise. "Oh, Tom, what a darling you are!" exclaimed his mother. "Come and kiss dear mamma, and then won't you show Miss Grey your schoolroom, and your nice new books?" "I won't kiss you, mamma, but I will show Miss Grey my schoolroom, and my new books." "And my schoolroom, and my new books, Tom," said Mary Ann. "They're mine, too." "They're mine," replied he decisively. "Come along, Miss Grey, I'll escort you."